Yes, I have a very big fish for us, the audience, to have an opportunity to learn from him. His name is Mr. Michael Adekoya. Mr. Michael Adekoya is a data engineer and he has a master's degree in big data and analytics from BCU in England. He's a speaker and he is a very sound coach. I'm very, very sure you will enjoy him where we'll be discussing publish a designer pipeline as a web service. This is one of the important elements under essentials of data science. So if you have any friends at home, you want them to be part of this event, please let them click on the session link and they will be able to join us on YouTube live. Mr. Michael Adekoya, it is my pleasure to welcome you on board. You have the floor. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. Popola Isiaka.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the part of the world. Yeah, my name is Michael Adekoya, and today we'll be talking on how to publish a designer pipeline as a web service. So before that, a brief about me. I'm a data engineer and a big data analytics enthusiast, data scientist. Um, at the same time, I've done quite a lot within the data engineering space and machine learning space. So it's a continuous learning and a continuous, providing solutions to providing solutions to problems in the enterprise. But basically, I work basically as an enterprise data engineer. All right. So today, what we'll be doing today basically is how to publish a designer pipeline. So now, before we go into fully how to publish a designer pipeline as a web service, now the first thing that comes to our mind that I just want to give in a layman's language the overview of everything we want to do today is the situation whereby we have you have designed a machine learning model. For example, whatever model, maybe you have a model to predict how the pricing of houses work, or to predict if there's going to be rain, if it's going to rain tomorrow, or if it's going to rain some days, and then you have some data which you have used to train the model. And after training the model, the big question that comes is, of course, you know that when you have a solution, that is a solution on its own. When you have a solution and no one is using that solution, I don't think that is what we want. We want a solution whereby after coming up with a solution, every other person can use that solution, whatever we have created, and that is what we are talking about today. So is in machine learning, you create a model, you've trained a model, you've done all the necessary phases, pre-processing and training, and then you have the model. The model is ready to be used. Now the question now is, how do other people use that model? And that is what we're talking about. So how do you publish a model as a web service? But this time around, if you're used to, whether you're new or you're used to machine learning in Microsoft Azure, there are different ways of authoring your model, like different way of designing your model. You can either use um, the designer, use the designer, or you can use the automated ML, or you can use, of course, maybe your notebooks and what have you. That when you're using notebook, maybe you're using Python, you're designing in Python and what have you. So all of those spaces, you can actually deploy those models as websites. But for this, in this today's edition, the aspect we're only looking at is when you use the designer, when you're using the designer, and that's what we'll be doing. So I'll quickly go through my slides so that it just shows everything we'll be doing and then why we jump into the demo. So the first thing, the some of the key things that we want to before we can deploy our machine learning model as a web service, some of the key things we really need to do before we do that is one, after we assume that we already, the first thing is that we already have a working machine learning model that has been designed using the designer is already working. We assume that we already have that model on ground. As soon as we have that model, uh, The next thing we need to, there are four important things that we need to do. The first one is from the pipeline that we use in developing our model, we have to create a real-time inference pipeline. So the real-time inference pipeline is nothing but the platform or like clusters, inferencing cluster, sorry, that will allow our model, the model we have deployed, to run on different platforms using different clusters and different nodes. That's what the real-time inference pipeline is meant for. It's just a platform to just process it. Then second, we are going to create an inferencing cluster, which is the cluster that will process our real-time inference pipeline that we've created. Then number three, we now deploy the real-time and we deploy a real-time endpoint. So deploying a real-time endpoint is basically that platform that or that but that part, that aspect that would allow our deployment, our real-time inference pipeline that we've created, it will allow it to add other important environmental variables like the input, the web input, the web output, what the output is going to be, what the output is going to likely output is going to be. That's the interface. It will provide an interface that will show that to the user. Then lastly, when we deploy the real-time endpoint, then of course it's only expected that we can test the real-time, test our model, tells the real-time endpoint that we've deployed. When we do the testing, then we can now see how, when we do the testing, we see the output ourselves with our own test data, and then it will give us options of, if you want to consume that web service, it give us a REST API option, a REST API URL, that if you want to consume the web service, whether using Python, using R, using C sharp, and what have you. So that is the first part. So for the prerequisite for this very particular tutorial set, is that the part one, or like this, like my slide said, that complete part one of the tutorial to learn how to train and score a machine learning model in the designer. The part one of this tutorial is that a linear regression model has already been created. That's the part one. And I provide the URL where you can go through all the steps to create the designer pipeline. So to create and it said, so you create a real-time inference pipeline like I've explained. So to deploy your pipeline, you must first convert your training pipeline into a real-time inference pipeline. So whatever we've used to train our model in the first instance, in the first phase, then that's what we convert into a real-time inference pipeline. That's just what it's saying there. So, but this process removes the training component and has web service input and output to handle requests. So the only difference is that the pipeline that we used to pipeline that was used for training, yeah, the pipeline that was used for training, on converting it to a real-time inference pipeline, um, we when you convert it to the inference pipeline, as soon as you create an inference pipeline, the process just removes the training component of that pipeline, and then it adds the web input and output to handle our request. Since we want to convert that to a web service so that other people can use it. Yeah. Okay. So to create the real-time inference pipeline is just when we get to the designer interface, there is an option that says create inference pipeline at the top. We just when we select that option, that's its configuration. Then the new pipeline will look like this. This is, if you see where you have the from the first, when you look upper part here where you have the web service input, that the web service input, that is the part that will allow the user, whoever wants to use our model, to input their own data, their own fresh or new data. And then towards the end where we have the web service output, that is where the output of whatever the model is, that's where they're going to see the output. The only thing that has been removed from this part, let me see from here, when you look at this, hold on, okay. When you look at this model now, you observe that, okay, sorry, if you look at this model, you observe that from where we have the first thing we have there is the automobile price data, raw, select column, then clean the data, split the data, and what have you, the train model, and then okay, it's not captured. But towards the end, when you have the train model, we have the evaluate where you score and you score the model. And so the option where you have to evaluate, where you have to score the model, yes, will be there. Where you have to evaluate the model, we'll not take out the evaluating the model this time around, and then we'll change it to we bring in a Python script that would, to execute a Python script that in between that process. So although we'll come to a demo now and then we'll explain. I just want to explain all of this so that we understand what we're doing, so it won't look like magic to all of us. So when we create the inference pipeline, several things happen. So the training model is stored as a data set. So the training component like train model and split data are removed. That is from the original pipeline that we created. Some these components will be removed. Then the web service input, web service output components are added so that users can actually consume it. You can have input from the web service input. You can provide your own data, supply your own data. We're going to do that, supply our own data. Usually the data is in JSON format. We supply our own data, and then the web service output, it comes out for us in form of a JSON file as well. So when we submit that, we just select submit that, and then we set up a real-time endpoint, which is the deployment arena or environment where it will be deployed. And then during the deployment endpoint, we just need to specify the name that we want to deploy our web service as. So when we specify the name, then the compute type, we can actually have the Azure Kubernetes service or the compute instance or the compute instance, or an instance or container instance. So those are usually the two that we can actually deploy in for now. So we just specify one of that, and then if we have a compute name that we've created before, we can specify that. If not, it can create one for us. We just specify the container and it will create one for us on the fly. And then an inference cluster. So in the dialog box, so just select this. You can select any existing, just like what I've explained. You have Kubernetes service cluster to deploy your model to. So if you don't have this, then you can use the following steps to just create a compute and navigation inference cluster, and this will be created for us. So, and then inference cluster, if you don't have any inference cluster created before, we can just enter. We can if we have anyone created, we can specify the one we have created before. But if we don't have any, this is just a step to create. We just go to the manage part of the machine learning studio, and then specify new, and that will be done. So then when that is done, we just deploy our endpoint. And when we do that, real-time endpoint, and our service, it will take a while for the algorithm to work, for the deployment to be completed. And as soon as deployment is completed, we'll get a notification that tells us that the deployment has finished. So it might not, but it may take a little minute, some minutes for it to be completed. And then at the end, we test the real-time endpoint. It generates a REST URL for us, the Swagger definition, status and tags and what have you, and then a consume tab where we can actually see what has been done. So let's quickly go to a demo to do that now. So in the demo, the first thing as usual that we always need to do is to okay, we are here. Of course, always come into our Azure portal. So here in the Azure portal, of course, if you're starting new or fresh, I've always it's always advisable, if you have your services, if you have your resource group, create a new resource group and name it whatever you want. I have already created a resource group, and my resource group name for this section is the Azure Machine Learning Resource Group Demo. So this is my own resource group. And then so if supposing you're creating this for the first time, of course, you can just create your group. You can, just create a group here, create group. When you put on the create option, it will ask you for all these credentials. Just specify the name, and then what have you reviewed the specify the name, maybe AI. It should also be a unique name, and then you review the create. Okay, just review your for validation pass. Review your what have you. When that is done, if it passes the review part, then it creates. Yeah, just click on the create, and it creates your resource group. So once you have your resource group, you can also go back into your resource group. And within your resource group, the next thing you just need to do is create your machine learning. Just search for machine learning. Yeah, now we're inside the resource group now. Just create and look for the machine learning. You can easily search for our machine learning service. So when we type our machine learning service, So the Azure Machine Learning Service, this is it. You can create, if you click on create Azure Machine Learning Service, then it will ask you for the name of the workspace we want to use. You specify the name of the workspace. When you specify the name of the workspace, the storage account, it will do that for us. You can create that for us on the go. Say AZL storage. That will be a unique name as well. Workspace. So that will be a unique name, and then you specify review and create as well. When we do that, when that is done, it gives us the machine learning service itself, and within the machine learning service, this is what will come. This is what we'll have. Um, so once that is done, this is what we are going to have. This is what is going to give us, and when it gives us this, then we can now launch the studio. This is where to launch. You just click on the launch button, and of course, like I said in my previous demo, if you need some of the one of the some of the managerial tools or administrative tags that you can do, you can actually download this the config.json, which will save all the information, all the environment variables that we use in setting up our machine learning studio. So you can download this as a JSON file. When we click on this download button here, we have it as a JSON file. We can use it whenever we need again. So now once we launch our studio, it brings us here. Okay. So when it brings us here, yeah, you remember what we're saying is that we are assuming that we have designed a what do you call it? We have designed a machine learning model, maybe for example, maybe a linear regression machine learning model using the designer. So yeah, we have three options where we can author, just like I mentioned earlier, where we can author our machine learning models. We can actually author it in either as a design using the designer, automated ML, or notebooks, or you have different notebooks. You can use maybe Python, you can use R, and what have you. So, but for this purpose of this, for what we're doing, what we're considering is using designer. So for the designer, to use the designer, yeah, I'll just show us something, because before we deploy it as a web service, we assume that we must have created a a pipeline, a designer pipeline. So to create a designer pipeline is very simple. I'll just show us the basics of creating a designer pipeline, then I'll show us the designer pipeline that I've created, because it takes time. When you create a pipeline and you're running on it, it takes time for it to come up. So it takes 20 minutes, and then you have to you have to submit the job and whatever. So first thing is, when we have in the studio, when we find ourselves in the machine learning studio in our workspace here, the first thing we need to do is specify a compute. Comes under the manage, come to a compute. We need, for whatever we'll be doing here, training our model, we actually need a compute cluster. So the compute cluster is that like the node, the core, the nodes where that will actually, that our engine, that whatever we're doing, our machine learning model will run upon. It needs that. We need to specify that. So from here we can create a compute cluster. When you click on new, you have to create a compute cluster. Just and select the region that is closer to you, and then just, you can accept all the default setting. You can use the standard, just accept all the default setting. Yeah, it's just telling us that, okay, well, is the virtual machine we're using dedicated, the virtual machine type, CPU, the size, just like when you're creating a virtual machine, like a computer. So, and then we specify the number of the cores that we want, and it also tells us to specify the number of cores that it we want. But for now, we can use this default option, that the recommended one that we have here, and then it will tell you the cost per hour. So when this service is running, this is the cost per hour, $0.35 per hour. So we can actually do that, use that, and then we click on the next. When you click on next, then we have to give the compute cluster a name. So you can just give it a name, whatever name you want. And then, yeah, when you give it a name, the minimum nodes, specify the minimum nodes. Usually for this, you can actually specify the maximum nodes to be 4. So that means it will be like 4 different clusters where our job will run it concurrently, and then it will be more faster. So that's how we configure that. The reason why it's not giving me 4 there. So supposing I selected this one and then I said next, I can have 4. Okay, 3. I have 3 maximum clusters, because due based on the standard, the virtual machine configuration we select, it actually tells us the amount of the capacity, that the maximum number of nodes that uh VM can VM size can actually make use of. So that's just what we specified there, 3. And then the idle seconds before scale down. Now, this idle second before scale down is if you're not doing anything with the machine before it's just stop, it's scale down, before it scale down, how many seconds we want. So when we're idle, so we usually can say maybe when we're idle for like 2,400 seconds or maybe 3,400 seconds, as the case may be, just specify. And then when that is done, put a name. When you put a name, and then just click on create. So when you create, you have your compute clusters. Yeah, so I'll just cancel that. So these are complete. So this is one I have. I have a CPU cluster. So that is done. Now, since that is done, now that means whatever model I want to start designing now, whichever part I want to auto my model in the designer, it has the cluster to run upon. So now we'll come back to the designer. So when we come back to the designer is just the interface. I'm sure we must have had lessons on how to use designer. So designer is just interface where to allow us to we don't have to use any code. We're just doing drop and drag and drop. So and it is so the part that we're going to use here is the easy to use the pre-built-in component. So in the designer, if I click on new under the new pipeline, the pre-built-in component, here we have some component that are already there the whole Azure platform has given us a sample data set so that we can get for hands-on so that we can easily understand all of this uh whole principle. So when I click on that, the next thing I want to do to create my design type pipeline, of course, I need to specify the data I want to work with. Yeah, and then so specify data I want to work. Before that, I can just under this option here or come to setting, specify that okay, select the compute type that we want. The compute we just created is a compute cluster. They will select the name, which is the CPU cluster. That will be whatever we are running. That's you should make use of that as default. Then our workspace. Then we can give our uh, pipeline a name. We can just say demo live name, demo live. That's the name. You know, demo live maybe for prediction or something. So just give it a name, and then when we give it a name, so we have our demo live prediction. Then the next thing is for our data. We have to bring in a data. So there is this data on. I've even forgotten what we have this data on here. We have the data on raw data on. I think is prediction automobile. Yeah, thank you, automobile. So yeah, there was a model I've already created that automobile price. What the model does is to automobile price. So what this model does is to predict the price of cars, automobiles, and then for it to predict the price of those cars, there are some inputs that the machine learning is going to take into cognizance. It has to examine those input. So some of those, all those input, all the variables it have, the variables it has. So yeah, I'm just opening the data to just see what we have inside the data. So in the data here, these are some of the columns. All the columns have about 26 columns, and then this one is just showing us only the 250 rows. So it has symbolizing, it has normalized losses, the make of the car, fuel type, aspiration, number of doors that the car has, the body, the drive wheel, then engine location, wheelbase, length, width, height, and so on and so forth. That's all this. This is what we have in the data, and then of course that's the price because this is the price. That's what we are trying to predict as well. So this is the data we are working with. So with this data, of course, and then in this data here, yeah, when before you start creating your model, of course, you have to do some cleaning, pre-processing, and all of that. Anyway, this is just how we start. Then by the time we want to do, suppose we want to do any cleaning because I quickly need to run down to our the one already created. Suppose we want to do any cleaning from the component here, we can just have maybe select some columns that we want. So we can say select column. There's a component that says select columns in data set. I can bring it here, drag it here, and then connect with this, connect from the data that I have. Yeah, I can double click this to edit the column to say the data, the columns I want to work with and what have you. I can select all the columns I want to work with, whether by rules or by name. Maybe all the columns I want to work. If I want to work with all of the columns, I can say add all and then exclude the normalized losses because we really don't need this one. I can save that and then close this. So before I've started building my pipeline like this now. So the first thing is input my data, select the columns that I want to use. So that is how it goes on. It keeps going on like that, like that, like that. But however, I've built a pipeline already. So I'll just go to my pipeline. So I'm not going to save this one now. I'll just go out of it. I've built a pipeline already, and the pipeline is this is again, this is my pipeline. Yes, this is my pipeline. So in the pipeline that I've created, I'll just walk us through what the pipeline is doing, and then because I've already done the deployment as well and how to do the deployment. So in the pipeline here that I've created here, what we're doing here is just from we're trying to predict the price of automobiles based on this data set that we have. The data set that I just showed us earlier, the 26 columns, and these are all the columns that it has and what have you. So the next thing I did here was to select the columns that I want to work with under this option here. And the columns I want to work with, uh, I want to work with the symboling column, make, fuel type, and the cylinder of the car, the engine size, and what have you. Those are the columns that are of interest. They are more like the independent variable. So now I have to clean it. Now in the data set, there are some part of it that part of the columns like the ball, the stroke, the horsepower. They have those columns have data that are what do you call it? They have data that are not a number. They have some dirty data. Let me just quickly show us here. They have some dirty data. We can go through this later, or I'll give us a sample where we can. When we see, I'll give us a sample where we can actually see everything I've done here. For example, when we see the ball or stroke, if where is the ball or stroke here? Okay, this is the ball here. Yeah. So if you look at it downward, you can see here that that's not a number. So all this not a number is not good for our model. We need to clean our model. So we need to get rid of this out of our model. And that's what we did in this cleaning missing data. So in this cleaning missing data, under the cleaning missing data, so we the ball stroke horsepower, and then what we just did was to remove the entire column. The cleaning mode we did was to remove entire row that has no or we need that data set. Then the next thing we did was to normalize the data. Now normalization actually helps us to make our data to scale our data so that it have the scaling. It helps the scaling of our data and then prepare it ahead for the training. So the next thing is to use a linear regression model. Since we are doing prediction, linear regression model, we brought in a linear regression model from the component that we have here, and then we split our. Well, first thing is we split our data. We split the data. We have to split the data to test or train, and then when we do that, we now use the linear regression model. The result of the test data, the train data, we'll put it into our train model, and then create a linear regression model that will work on the train on the train model. And then when that is done, at the end, we try to score our model. Scoring the model, we just score the model to see some of the important parameters within the model. However, I'll share a URL with us where to take us through all the process to create this design pipeline, because this is not what we really want to do. Yeah, what we want to do is after we have done all of this, how can other people use what we have done? So when we score, this is just a way of just evaluating what we have done, our model, give us some parameters and what have you. Then we evaluate our model in terms of when you're evaluating your models, it gives you important metrics like the mean error, absolute mean error, where you have the absolute error, relative square, and what have you. These are just coefficients that will help you to say okay to determine if your model has actually worked the way you want to score your model, to evaluate your model. So once that is done, and we are sure that this model is working fine, this is where we are okay with the evaluation of our model. So this is where the other aspect now comes in, where we want to deploy our model as a web service for other people to use it. Now the next thing we just need to do here is, well, within the uh within the jobs on the asset where we have all our jobs, the next thing we want to create is from this pipeline that we have here, we just need to click on here, create inference pipeline. Like I showed in our slide, create inference pipeline. Now, if we want to create an inference pipeline, we want the real-time inference pipeline. That's what we want to do. So when you click on create inference pipeline, as soon as if I click on create inference pipeline, another one, okay, let me click on it. I just hope it's from the take away the one I have done before. Okay, so once we click on create inference pipeline, so when you are creating inference pipeline, is that point that is converting, trying to convert it into a the process is trying to convert it into a form that will be usable, that other users can actually, you know, use what we have done. So here in this part, there are some little modifications we just need to do here. Although I've already done the modifications in the one in the pipeline I've created, I'll show us. I just want to show us, want to create on the what to show us. Now it's automatically added a web service input, and then it also added. Come in, let me minimize this. So it automatically added a web service input one, and then it added some other additional pipeline, and then the web service output that I mentioned. So yeah, what we want to do here now is to this automobile price data. If other people will be using it, because they'll be using it with their own data, not they'll be using with their own data, not our own data. This is the data we use to train the model. So we need to get rid of this uh our data, and then we now need to add another component. Okay, I cannot. We need to add another component. Okay. I'll just show us. We need to add another component here at this part that will allow users to enter the data manually. And at the same time, we need to get rid of this evaluate model, because we'll not be evaluating the model again. The user doesn't need to evaluate the model because we've done the evaluation of the model. And we just need to allow, there's a script, we just need to include a script that will allow the user to be able to, that will allow the whatever the output, the score of the model to be outputted, to be sent to this web service. There's a Python script that we just need to input. So I'll just show us the inference, the real-time inference that I have created. So I'll go back to, I say I'll lose all on save. Yes, I'll confirm this because I was just showing us what I've done before. So from this pipeline, so after I selected create inference, this is what okay, this is the job. Just hold down. So this is what it came out when it came out with this. The input, the web service input. I added the web service. He added the web service input. So I just added a component that says enter data manually, and then enter data manually. I needed to add like a data that is in the same format, in the same that has the same structure as the data that I used to train my model. However, the only thing I just need to exclude from that data, from this part here, that I need to exclude from that data. If I double click on this now, you see the data. Let's see if we can see the data here. Okay, this is what we have here. This is what we have here. Is that selected? Oh yes. So in this part here, the data that we're working with, some of the data were the columns we're working with. These are all the columns we are working with And then I just need to select because if you observe here, there's the price. Let's see, we won't go towards the ending. These are just the columns of all the data that we have. There is a price there. We're trying to predict the price of the we are trying to predict the price of a car. So, and then when you are inputting your data, okay, it hasn't taken off. When you are inputting your data, you're not supposed to put the price as part of the columns that will be evaluated during the training, during the whole processing. We need to take out the price because that's the price. The price will act as the label. Whatever you're predicting is called label. Target as a label. And then when that is done, the label, when that is done, at the end of the day, when the whole algorithm, when the user have inputted their own data, it comes out of the service under the web service output. And like I said, we have a Python script here. This is just the Python script. What the Python script is just telling what the Python script is just doing. This is the Python script. What it's just saying is that the score result, whatever the result the model has scored, the result should be saved as a data frame, and the data frame should leave as a score label, and then the result column should. This is how it should. The score, you should rename it as score label, and it should be called the predicted price. The score label should be called the predicted price. So that will not be the predicted price. So once this is done, the next thing we need to do is to click on this deploy. Once we've input, once we've configured do those configuration, the next thing is to click on deploy. And when we click on deploy, that is where it comes to this endpoint. Under the deploy, when we click on deploy as well, if we click on deploy now, we need to specify some, in the what do you call it, in the PowerPoint slide I said, we need to specify some parameters as well when we want to deploy to the real-time endpoint. So to deploy to the real-time endpoint, of course, we'll give it a name. We'll give it a name. Then the compute service we want to use, I actually just advise that we just use for the purpose of this demo. We can use the Azure Container Instance. Or so when we use the Azure Container Instance, give it a name, maybe whatever name. Just give it your name. And when you give it a name, give it a description. But as soon as we click on deploy, the next thing is the model. Everything we have done that we've trained before, it will deploy it to the endpoint here under this question where we have the endpoint. And when we have the endpoint price now, that was the endpoint. Here we now have, we give it a name. The one I did was I gave it the name that is called predict auto price. So predict auto price. By the time we deploy it to the endpoint now. This is when it's completed. This is what we have here. You can actually monitor it during the deployment. And if you go to my slide, where is my slide again? If you go to my slide, let me see. If you go to my slide, I said that during when the deployment is, so yeah, this is where we are right now. So when you set up the real-time endpoint, you just specify all the all the credentials here, and then I create a okay, this is the computer. We've done this one. So when you deploy, by the time you deploy, you get a notification here that your deployment has been completed. So if your deployment is completed, it comes to the real time endpoint. You now go to the endpoint. When we go to the endpoint, that is when we would now have to test what with our data. So this is where we are now. We assume that after clicking on deploy, it has deployed to the endpoint here. When you deploy to the endpoint, the next thing we need to do here is just test our deployment. So here we are predicting the price, and this is the input data. Everything we have done, this is the input data. If you look at the input data, it's JSON file, and it's saying from the web service interface, these are the columns it's working with, symbolizing normalized losses, this and what have you. It gives them a value. Each has its own value, and then highway MPG, the city MPG gives it a value. The horsepower of the car we're trying to predict the price, the compression ratio of the car, the stroke. So this is for one vehicle. This is for one vehicle, one automobile. This is another one for another automobile, and then this is the last input again for another automobile. These are like three different inputs. So by the time we click on the test, we want to see our result here. So what is said? This is the result. Now it has generated a result for us. What is just telling us is that for this first part of the input here, that we have all these features for this particular car that we have mentioned, this automobile that we have mentioned. The automobile has four-cylinder. Yeah, the first one. That is the predicted price of the automobile based on those features. And the second one too, it has the front door, the engine location is front and what have you. This is this price. This is the predicted price of the second vehicle, and the third. This is the predicted price of the third vehicle. So now I said we are going to use our own test data. Since we know the format in which the data is coming is a JSON file, but we can let's just copy it directly. So I have a test data here that I want to use. So this is the test data here. So we just want to pick only one. So symbolizing, remember it has to be the structure that this, it has to be in this structure, the structure we have used to train our model. So this is the same structure. So I've just symbolizing, I can change this to 4, or let me leave it at 3. Number of doors, if I say it is 2, number of doors, let me, if I leave it at 2, or let me say 4 number of doors. It's convertible. Convertible usually is not for yeah, well, anyway, we can just leave it. Then drive wheels, then engine location, it should be front. We can even pull back for one. So like that. So we just have this sample. These are input data. So we'll copy this our input data. we are testing it now. That's what we're doing. So we can put our input data here, just copy everything here and paste here. We'll paste it here and then click on test. So based on this that we've imputed now, symbolizing anything, it has given us the predicted price of this model of this automobile as 14,744 as the predicted price. So this is how we are of course we are using it now. So any other user can also come in with their own data and just make sure that it's in this same format, and then make sure that they supply all these features and pump it into this our model that we've created. So any other person can use this model. Now we have done that part. The last part of it is now how do they consume it now? Since we have done it, see that it's working, we have used our own different data entirely, and then it's working. Now there is look at under this option here. Under this option, we have the details, test, consume. So we'll go under the consume. So the consume under the consume option here, the consume option will actually give us those options. This it comes as usually as a REST API endpoint. Yeah, this one, yeah. So as a REST API option, and then we can generate some primary key to some for authentication. We can just generate some of all these ones for authentication, copy all of these, put it into your whatever you're doing. If you need to consume, that is just know how to consume a REST API, and then you need some credentials to do to for authentication sake, and then we can copy all of these credentials to the whoever wants to use their secondary key, and they'll use it. And then the consume options, that's just for the authentication part, because before you're consuming any API, you have to authenticate a user. Some you don't need authentication, but for this one, you need authentication. Now, for the consumption option, now you can either consume if you want to consume it as a C sharp, maybe in your C sharp project. You don't need to do anything. It has already generated all the script you need for us. This is all the script you need to consume it as a web service, as a C sharp. This is everything you need here. Just copy all of this out and go and paste it in wherever your framework that you wherever you want to consume it in your service. This is if you are consuming as using C sharp. Then if you want to consume, if you're a Python guy like me and you want to consume in your maybe in your Python, so this is just the only thing you need to do. You just need to import all of these libraries, import all these libraries. If I just copy everything here and then paste it in your notebook or your um, editor for Python that you're using your Python, and then of course specify the JSON file here, and then it will do that. And then if you are also R in the R library, it will just bring in the R library, and then the R JSON to bring in these libraries, and then this is how you consume it. It has the format for you to consume in R. This is also how you consume it, and if you give this to the user whoever want to consume it and the authentication, they're able to use our model. So that's how we use convert a designer pipeline into uh, inference real time um, web service. And then so I'll share this link with us. It's already in my slide. So you just go through this Microsoft link on Microsoft Learn to show us how to create a pipeline in the designer. And then when you create the pipeline in designer, all the steps you need to create a pipeline, all the ones I mentioned earlier, all the steps you need to create a pipeline, the columns, it gives you a sample data set, the predicted auto that I did, and then how you select all of the columns that you need, how you run the pipeline, because you need to run the pipeline at certain stages when you run the pipeline. After you've created the pipeline, and then the training that is the training pipeline. You evaluate your model to see if your model actually pass your whatever if it pass your evaluation, whatever you've specified. Look at the you evaluate in terms of all these coefficients, and then when that is done, you now from the training pipeline that you've used to train your model, you now create and run an inference pipeline as well. So create an inference pipeline. When you create an inference pipeline, as soon as you initiate the option to create an inference pipeline, it automatically generates all of this step for you, where you have to take out the automobile price data that I mentioned earlier. Then you bring in your enter data manually. Then the Python's you take out the evaluation model, evaluate model, and then this execute Python script. You add it from the component. It will also tell you how to add it from the component. And this is the test data. You just copy this test data, copy this
Hello,
test
Mr.
data.
Mike. Hello, Mr. Michael.
Yeah.
You have 8 minutes more.
Oh, no problem. I'll just round up in 1 minute now.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, so you copy the test data, and then when you just go through everything here, yeah, and then for this execute Python script, you just there is a script there that will be given to you here. Okay, this is the Python script. Python copy this Python script, paste it in that execute Python script, and you deploy your model. And once you deploy your model, you can also test it with your sample data, and that's it. So I have the URL in my in the PowerPoint. So that's it. Thank you all for having me, and that's my time in 1 hour. Mr. Isaac, are you there? Mr. Isaac, sorry, Popola.
Wow, 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 wow. Mr. Michael, it has been a very wonderful session. For people that are not developer, they will have lost out. That what is this guy talking about? But for the developers in their house or the people that are coming up as developers, of course, we should be able to follow you up and get to know some of the terms that that you are talking about. You know, when I started my data journey, I started from the data science perspective. And when we enter into the mainstream and I was being taken towards the machine learning, I said, machine learning, coding, this one, and that one. Until somebody told me one day that, look, Bukola, there are a lot of things, there are a lot of machine learning on data science that you can do on the Microsoft Azure that can, that can help you to reduce low code that if you are not good in coding, at least you can make use of low code aspect of it and you get your better results. And this is one of the beautiful applications of machine learning, whereby you design your your algorithm and you get a better result and your app service is running. So we want to thank you for the session you have been able to take us through. For the benefit of those that didn't start with us, I would like to do some recap of where you started from. The idea is that um, how do we make use of designer as one of the components of machine learning in deploy machine learning model? I think that's the concept of the training, because machine learning designer has been a very great tool to the developers, and majority of people are not maximizing the advantage, and that is why this session has to come up that look, what you are struggling to achieve, you have a tool that can be of assistance to you. So you have taken us through the processes on how to create a real-time inference pipeline, create an inferencing cluster, deploy real-time endpoints, test the real-time endpoint. So these are the key milestones in the deployment of machine learning model. So I want to thank you for the great job you have done. You have been able to do justice to this session, and I'm very, very glad that we have you on our session. So do we have any closing session on any closing remark?
Well, okay. So what I just want to say is, I can see. Sorry, I wasn't even checking the comment section. I can see some of my friends, so in the
Yeah,
section. Yeah, it's good.
yeah,
Yeah. See, I just want to encourage everyone. They say at first you can just watch the video again, and then the
yes,
URL in the slide. Go through the URL in the slide. You see when you create the model, because of course, like I said, it doesn't make any sense when you create a model and then you keep it to yourself. So
yes,
other
yes,
people should be able to use it, and that's how we show you how we can other people can consume it as a web service, that they can use it with their
yes.
own data. You just tell them like
Uh,
this data has to be in this structure, in this format. So I just want to encourage everyone that it's even if it's just like magic, don't stop
yeah.
there. Always will
Mm,
we watch all the series. There have been a lot of series on getting started with machine learning model, getting started with machine learning model, deploying
yeah,
machine model, authoring in whether designer, notebook,
yeah,
and
yeah.
automated ML or what have you. So don't give up there. Don't just give up. Go through all of those
Mm,
things. Understand it's not
yeah,
difficult. It's not difficult. Just spend time with
mm,
it, and then you get everything. And I want to thank everyone that joined, and thank you for having me.
yeah,
It's been a pleasure to be here today.
yeah.
And thank you for Popola and the coordinators, the partners and sponsors. Thank you very much. And that's it.
Thank
For
you.
me.
All right. So before Before we end this session, I'm just dropping a link that is to the event that was held 2 days ago, as part of the component of this training, which is a 10-week event. We are just ending the ninth week today. There was an event that was done at a Microsoft ADC office in Lagos 2 days ago, and I've been able to share the YouTube link. Please take your time to go through it. It was a very wonderful one, very, very, very wonderful one. There were a lot of unfailing of important informations that have not been communicated before. So it's just 4 hours plus, less than 5 hours. You get to know everything that happened and opportunities that coming up for us to be aware of. That's number one. The number two, for the participants that are online or those that will be watching this video later, we want to implore you that you filling the feedback form. I have shared the feedback form earlier. I will also share it again. If you check the strolling message, that is for the feedback form. I will also share it again so that we'll be able to have our feedback. Please, feedback is very important. We want to know what we have done well and what we need to improve on. We can't on our feedbacks, whether you are watching it live or you'll be watching the recorded version. So let me quickly check the feedback form again. It's already strolling, but I want to drop it on the chats. Can I see a copy here? Mm, yeah, we can just copy it from the strolling message. That's number two. And number three, this event is a 5 week, is a 10-week event. We are just at the night. And the information I have for us is that all the previous sessions were recorded and we have access to it at any point in time. Just go to YouTube and type Niger Data Platform. 9 J for Junior, A for Angle, together Niger, then Data Platform. We'll be able to see all the sessions in the previous editions. So, to my guests, we want to thank you for giving us the best, and we are very glad that our listeners will be able to maximize the opportunity you have given to us. So, on behalf of the team, the planning team, and the audience, we want to thank you for having you in our session today. Thank you,
Thank you
Mr.
very much.
Michael.
It's
All
a
right. So, on
pleasure.
the next time when we have you on board, thank you so
All
much.
right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye bye. Yeah. Bye bye. Yeah. Thank you. So, Mr. Michael.